I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. I know my son is outside, but I particularly want to thank my son for he could have been enjoying the Star Wars movie rather than coming here and listening to his mother. So we mothers rejoice over small victories. I thought that one is really nice. I should mention that one. My name is Cora Foley. I chair the Secretary's Open Forum and the Asian Pacific American Federal Foreign Affairs Council, which are the sponsors for today's program. I will moderate the program and introduce the speakers. But first, a word from your sponsors. Let me start with the Secretary's Open Forum. It was created in 1967, partly as a result of the ferment from the Vietnam War period, to provide the Secretary of State and the Foreign Affairs community with a venue for discussing alternative diplomatic strategies that serve America's national interest. I want to call your attention to a flyer that I did pass around today because I think actually it fits some of the things that we're discussing. I'm sponsoring a series of conversations on America and the building of a civil society and a stronger foreign policy. The flyer announces that next week, on Tuesday, May 25th, 1999, I'm hosting a conversation on social trust and foreign policy, immigration, and law enforcement issues. That conversation will be led by Congressman John Conyers, Jr., the ranking member of the House Judiciary Committee, and Rose Achi, a valued member of the Asian Pacific American community and leader, will be joining us. The theme of that conversation is a key component of social capital, trust in other people, helps us to conduct an effective foreign policy, and we should be concerned with the decline of social trust in this country from almost 60% in 1960 to about 35% today. Next week, we will discuss the issue of building social trust in dealing with the complex issue of immigration and law enforcement in the American society. I hope you could join us then. Let me say something about the other program sponsor, the Asian Pacific American Federal Foreign Affairs Council, or APAFFAC as we fondly call it. It is an interagency association of employees of federal agencies with a mission of active involvement in U.S. foreign affairs. It was founded in 1981 to support the EEO mission of the foreign affairs agencies, particularly outreach, recruitment, professional development, and advancement of Asian Pacific Americans. As part of our mission, APAFFAC has sponsored celebrations of our heritage as Asian Pacific Americans. These celebrations offer us a chance to tell our stories. Through narratives about our lives and our dreams, we, the people of America's diverse groups, are able to see ourselves and each other in our common past. We celebrate a society unique in the world because the world is here. America is a place where the cultures of the world crisscross. It remains the great national challenge for Americans of diverse races and ethnicities to connect ourselves to a larger narrative called America. Connectedness is the theme of the exhibit, Witness Our Brothers Keepers, which honors Japanese American and Jewish American GIs who helped liberate Dachau. The exhibit was co-produced by the Japanese American National Museum and the National Museum of American Jewish Military History. APAFFAC is pleased to work with Ms. Irene Hirano, President of JANM, on this project of a 2-month display of the Witness exhibit at the State Department Diplomatic Lobby. I'm also grateful for the outstanding work of the JANM exhibit team, particularly Jennifer Mikami and Clement Hanami, who worked with the Smithsonian crew in installing the Witness exhibit. This is the 3rd exhibit that APAFFAC has sponsored. We have sponsored exhibits by the Bishop Museum of Honolulu, Hawaii. 1997 exhibit was on the legacy of Hawaiian excellence, and last year we honored the Filipino Americans and the centennial of U.S.-Philippine relations. We are very grateful to Senator Daniel K. Inouye for his generous support of APAFFAC programs. Our exhibit projects would not have succeeded without him. I also want to recognize the critical contributions of Marie Blanco of Senator Inouye's staff, Mr. Franklin Odo of the Smithsonian, and especially Mr. Stan Suyat of the Energy Department in implementing APAFFAC programs over the years. Heritage Month celebrations also remind us of the importance of vigilance in defense of human rights. There is no question that the United States has vastly improved opportunities for minorities and commitment to diversity. But some of the things we take for granted now were far different in the past. Many barriers have been overcome, but we cannot allow ourselves the luxury of thinking that the constitutional and legal framework and the cultural tolerance we enjoy by and large are physical constants like gravity and the strong force that will never be open for re-examination. As President Clinton stressed in in the proclamation for this year's Heritage Month, while our nation has made enormous strides on the path to full equality and inclusion, our work is far from finished. The American challenge of e pluribus unum demands citizens of courage, integrity, and dedication to public service, like our speakers with whom I am privileged to introduce today. I now have the honor of introducing Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, Frank Inouye. Mr. Inouye is responsible for policy regarding international environment and science, population and refugees, the promotion of democracy and human rights, including women's, religious, and labor rights, counter-narcotics, and international law enforcement. Mr. Inouye is an expert negotiator in complex public and private issues. He has been active on several major nonprofit organizations, including terms as chairman of the Environmental Defense Fund, the League of Conservation Voters, and the Foundation for Civil Society, among others. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Undersecretary of State for Global Affairs, Frank Inouye.
Thank you, Corey. On behalf of Secretary Albright, I'd like to welcome Senator Daniel Inouye, former Congressman Norman Mineta, Ms. Irene Hirano, President of the Japanese American National Museum, and the distinguished guests in this room to this department. I hope you feel very welcome, and I hope that you will, before you leave here, view the exhibit that Corey was talking about. This is a very special day of Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I'd also like to say a word about somebody who is not here today, but I think is here with us in spirit, and that is the late Senator Spark Matsunaga. He served with the 100th Infantry Battalion and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, and also the Military Intelligence Service. I might add, I think I'm right in this, that the Senator also served with the Senator Inouye also served with the 442nd Regimental Combat Team. Spark was a leader who dedicated himself to the preservation of peace, and he is here, as I said, in spirit. And I'd like to congratulate Cora Foley, the president of the organization here, for putting together all of today's events at the department. In a moment, Senator Inouye and Congressman Mineta and President Hirano will speak on the past, and they'll speak on the present and the future of Japanese-American contributions to the richness of American diversity. But the present and the future rest on the past, and that's why we have the ribbon-cutting ceremony that will take place in maybe an hour or so for the exhibit called Witness, Our Brothers Keepers. And that exhibit is about the Japanese-American and the Jewish-American GIs who helped liberate Dachau, one of Nazi Germany's concentration camps. Our tribute to the Japanese Americans who served in the military in World War II, and our need to honor the memory of those who survived and died at the camps of Dachau. These two strands together tie many lessons of history, many lessons about the human spirit, about honor, about valor, about sacrifice, about courage. And this exhibit, this very special exhibit in our diplomatic lobby, prepared by the Japanese American National Museum, will remind us, remind all of us, all visitors who come to see it, of the sacrifices and the sorrows and the successes of those to whom we pay tribute. You know, the long and unacknowledged and unheralded role of Americans of Japanese origin in the military intelligence service has only slowly unfolded. With the opening of once secret files, the American public now knows of these linguists, these brave men who translated Japanese documents, interrogated Japanese prisoners from Alaska to Australia to Okinawa. They fought along with Merrill's marauders in Burma. They decoded Japanese military instructions. They drafted the Japanese terms of surrender. The brave men of the 100th Infantry Battalion and the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, they made enormous sacrifices. Together, they were eventually awarded 7 Presidential Unit Citations, almost 9,500 Purple Hearts, 1 Medal of Honor, 52 Distinguished Service Crosses, a Distinguished Service Medal, 560 Silver Stars, 28 Oak Leaf Clusters in lieu of second Silver Stars, 22 Legions of Merit, and 4,000 Bronze Stars. It's an incredible array of decorations, of honors, and it reflects an incredible amount of valor and dedication by those units. Thinking about those exploits can be painful, and I'm sure it is painful for some in this very room. But thinking about those exploits also can inspire us. Allow me to quote from the experience of a person who was actually in Dachau and was liberated. It's a quite remarkable little fragment that I think will illuminate what we're talking about today. Quote, "I was standing with a blindfold waiting to be shot, but the shot didn't come. So I asked the woman next to me, 'Do you think they're trying to make us crazy so we'll run and they won't have to feel guilty about shooting us?' She said, 'Well, we're not going to run. We'll just stand here.' So we stood and we stood, and suddenly somebody was tugging at my blindfold. He tugged this way and that way, and then he jumped up because he was short, and he pulled it off. I saw him and I thought, oh, now the Japanese are going to kill us. And I didn't care anymore. I said, just kill us, get it over with. And he tried to convince me that he was an American and that he wouldn't kill me. I said, oh no, you're a Japanese, and I know you're going to kill us. We went back and forth, and finally he landed on his knees, crying. And he said, with his hands over his face, "You're free now. We're American Japanese. You're free." What can we say when those who've been persecuted and discriminated against in their societies can behave so nobly and with such dignity and such compassion? Let me just introduce a personal note. I grew up in Los Angeles. And at the outbreak of World War II, I was very young. And I lived in an area where we had Americans of all kinds, Mexican Americans, Caucasians, Japanese Americans. And all of a sudden, one day, our Japanese American schoolmates told us that they had to leave. And we were probably, we were, I don't know, 6 years old, 7-year-old, 8-year-old. We were as patriotic as the next guy, and we could tell enemies from friends. But we couldn't understand why these classmates of ours were being removed from our midst. And we had an intuition, which of course proved totally correct. that these were as Americans as we were, and that somehow or other an injustice was being done. Now, nobody listened to us, of course. I don't think our parents listened to us, and certainly the U.S. didn't listen to us. But it struck me then that the qualities which made our Japanese American friends so integral a part of our society, and I might say it was more difficult for others because they didn't do that as skillfully as the Japanese Americans who had all the middle class values we had and all the aspirations we had, and were very much part of our social groups as well as our school. It was clear to us that they were Americans, and it was clear to us that somehow or other somebody was making a mistake. And of course we now know that that's the case. But when we read the stories of heroism of the Japanese Americans in the military, it is heartwarming not because they're any more brave than others, but because they were from a group that this country had these ambivalent feelings about, and that a group that was at times discriminated against. So to the members of the 100th Infantry Battalion, the 442nd Regimental Combat Team, the Military Intelligence Service, and your families, again, let me extend Secretary Albright's welcome. Let me reiterate our admiration for your sacrifice, for your courage, and for your example. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Loy. APAFFAC owes so much support, so much to the support of Senator Inouye. Every time I see him, the only things I could say are maraming salamat po. He's been extremely supportive of the Filipino-American community, and last year's conference, he reminded many of us that Filipinos actually became an integral part of the American workforce since the first settlement of the bayous of Louisiana in 1763. His eloquent speech and the proceedings of last year's program are in your program brochure. And if you think that it is so full of Philippine items, it must have been edited by a Filipino-American. You are correct. The story of Senator Inouye's courage and integrity has long inspired many Americans, particularly those of us in the Asian Pacific American community. As an 18-year-old, he enlisted in March 1943 and served with great valor in Europe with the legendary 442nd Regimental Combat Team. He came home as a captain with the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest award for military valor, along with other medals and citations. After working his way through George Washington Law School, Senator Inouye went on to a distinguished public service career. Senator Inouye is a living example of the citizen, the soldier, the statesman, critical to the development of American democracy. Ladies and gentlemen, I have the high honor and privilege of introducing an American hero, Senator Daniel K. Inouye.
My fellow Americans and ladies and gentlemen, although this gathering is one of Asian Pacific Americans to discuss our past, our present, and our future, I would prefer to look upon this gathering as a celebration of America, a celebration of the goodness of this nation. In my case, it began 100 years ago. It was early in the morning in the first week of June of 1899. A fire somehow began in the village of Yokoyama in the prefecture of Fukuoka. And the fire destroyed and demolished 3 residences. A few hours after that, the village council got together to determine the cause of the fire, and to decide upon who would pay for this. And after a few hours of deliberation, the village council came out with its decision and said that the Inouye residence was the cause of the fire. It started there. And therefore called upon the Inouye clan to pay for all the repairs, if necessary, and that was it. Soon thereafter, the head of the clan called upon his son, the eldest son, Asakichi, and said that we have a crisis in the family, a crisis that involves the matter of honor. We have three choices. Two are unspeakable. One would be to leave the village in the dark of the night and forever suffer the curse of shame. Our names would be crossed out of the village book, the Koseki Tohong. No one would marry our sons or our daughters. The other is to remain in this village and not pay the debt, but no one would talk to us. None of their daughters would marry our sons, and none of their sons would look upon our daughters. The third choice is the only one, and that is to pay whatever is necessary. It was calculated that at that time the repair costs would be slightly less than $300. But $300 100 years ago was an amount that was almost unattainable. So Asakichi was instructed to take his wife, Moyo, and his eldest son, Hyotaro, and go to Fukuoka City because there were recruiters there from a strange place called Hawaii. These recruiters were looking for able-bodied men and women to work in their cane fields. And he said that as soon as the debt is paid, I will let you return to the village. So they began this journey, and in September of 1899, they landed in Honolulu and from there transferred to Port Island, the island of Kauai. And they signed a contract within the first hour of their arrival. Pictures were taken of them. And the amount was a substantial amount. Asakichi, my grandfather, received $15 for 60 hours a week, 1 month. $15 for a month's work, 60 hours a week. The contract called for 4 holidays: Christmas, New Year's, Thanksgiving, and the Emperor's birthday. My grandmother received $10 a month for 60 hours a week, same terms. What deducted from both of them were $2.50 a month for transportation costs. They worked in the fields until 1924. The debt was paid at that time. Well, times have changed since then, but that beginning was the beginning of my journey. 25 years after the arrival of my grandparents, I was born in 1924. My mother was the daughter of immigrants who came to work in the fields. She was born in Hawaii, but a few things happened before my arrival. In 1922, the Supreme Court of the United States rendered a judgment and declared that Japanese were not qualified for citizenship. That was a rather strange decision, where one ethnic group was singled out. Then in 1924, the Congress of the United States passed its first Immigrant Quota Act. And in that act, they had a provision that said, if you are unqualified for citizenship, then that nation cannot have a quota. So Japan was singled out as the one country without a quota. And there were many other laws, for example, along the West Coast, that said that only citizens may hold title to land. But it applied only to the Japanese. If you were an Italian and not a citizen, you can still buy land, or German, or anybody else, but not a Japanese. As a result, when my parents got married, my mother lost her citizenship because she married an alien who happened to come to Hawaii when he was 3 years old. Then came December the 7th, then all hell broke loose. Soon thereafter, a couple of months later, the White House issued an executive order authorizing the United States Army to construct 10 camps. They were euphemistically called internment camps, but in essence, the description is that of a concentration camp. 10 of them located all over the United States, in Montana, in Wyoming, in Arizona, in places like Arkansas. And in these camps, 120,000 Japanese, most of them American citizens, were herded off with whatever they can carry on themselves. So you can imagine all the property that had to be abandoned in places like California. Billions of dollars worth of property had to be either sold. I had a friend of mine who had to sell his brand new Chevy for $100. It was either that or abandon the car. Then, about a month after the executive order, the Selective Service System issued a directive declaring that Japanese citizens or otherwise would be considered 4C. 4C is a frightening designation. 1A, as you know, is physically fit, mentally alert. 4F, something's wrong with you, physically or mentally. 4C, you are an enemy alien. So all of us, and many of you here, were declared to be enemy alien, which was the insult of all insults. So many thousands of us petitioned the government and the President of the United States, and a proclamation was issued saying that Americanism is a matter of mind and heart. It is not and never was a matter of race. And the formation of the 442nd was authorized. They were looking for 1,500 volunteers from Hawaii. Instead, over 8,000 volunteered, which represented about 85% of the eligible men. And the same thing happened in these camps. There were 10 camps, and to the surprise of American authorities, thousands volunteered. They were in prison, but they volunteered. Well, the rest is history. This unit, as the Secretary indicated, was the most decorated in the history of the Army. And furthermore, they were involved in a battle to rescue a battalion of Texans. Texans are huge men. They were rescued by small men. This battalion somehow got surrounded by German troops, numbering about a division, 20,000. They first sent a regiment of Texans, and they were pushed back. They sent another regiment of Texans, and they were pushed back. So we were in the vicinity, so they called upon the 442nd. The 442nd was already decimated to about half its size, but we were asked to do this job. And many of us knew that we were expendable. That's why we were called. But we looked upon this as the ultimate opportunity. And in 5 days, the rescue was successfully carried out. But it was costly. The casualty rate exceeded 800. Of that number, 300 were dead. The commanding general of the 36th Division, General Dahlquist, was not aware of the casualties. All he knew was that his men had to be rescued. Well, he was so grateful that he called upon our colonel, Colonel Pence, soon after the rescue was made known, and ordered him to assemble the men of the regiment so that he can personally thank them. So the next day, the regiment assembled in a field, an open farm, and the general was so angered that in the presence of other officers scolded our colonel. Told the colonel, I directed you to have the men assemble here. You have decided to disobey me and sent most of your troops on pass. Well, I can understand that, because when the troop commanders reported the adjutant's call and reported all present accounted for, the company I served in, E Company, was the largest, 42 officers and men. Our table of organization calls for 197 officers and men. 42 were standing there. There was another company, K Company, with 10 men, and the company commander was a staff sergeant. So you can imagine the general's chagrin in saying that you let all the men go on pass. The colonel looked at him and said, that's the regiment. That's the cost for rescuing your Texans. And when he realized that this was all that was left over, he couldn't give his speech. He gave the colonel a plaque, which incidentally was lost and discovered about 20 years ago. But it's ironic in a sense, but it also demonstrates the greatness of this country. In 1953, the law was amended so that the Japanese were included as part of the quota. And my parents were able to get naturalized, together with many hundreds of Japanese throughout this land. Then the GI Bill made it possible for many of us to study at taxpayers' expense and get all the degrees that we would have been denied were it not for this opportunity. But then something else happened. The United States Army, about 20 years ago, commissioned a committee of historians, military historians, to select 10 most important events and battles that were somehow part of the United States Army history. One of the 10 happens to be the Battle of the Lost Battalion. We are now, together with battles like Guadalcanal, the Battle of Saratoga. So we did pretty well. But we were paid the ultimate compliment. About a month ago, the President of the United States nominated a man from Kauai General Eric Shinseki. He's the #1 Army man. The Chief of Staff of the United States Army. And then about 10 years ago, the Congress, the President, with an overwhelming vote, declared that the action taken by the executive order in 1942 was wrong. The establishment of the camps was wrong. The internment of these men and women in these camps was wrong. And they apologized. The President personally apologized, and each one got a $20,000 redress, which was just token. And today, there are members from these families that serve in the Congress of the United States. At one time, there were 6 of us. Therefore, I'd like to call this a celebration of America. Oftentimes, in gatherings of this nature, one would speak only of the hardships and the evil that may have been rendered upon us. But when you look at it, I can't think of any other country as powerful as the United States that had the courage to admit wrong and to apologize. You think about that. No other country has ever apologized for its past sins. The United States has done so. Just a few days ago, the House and the Senate met in conference, and we declared that what we did to Latin American Japanese was wrong also. And we have, as part of the law, an apology of this nation to those men and women who were wrongfully incarcerated to be used as prisoner of war exchange. So this country is a great country. Yes, it does wrong. We have to remain vigilant at all times because we do make mistakes. Democracies always make mistakes. You can't get away from that. But whenever the mistake is made known, this country is great. It apologizes. So here I am, proud to be an American. Thank you very much.